The following video has been created without the use of AI. Please support your human content creators by liking the video and commenting something down below. Subscribing is optional. Now please, enjoy the show.
Sebastian never was one for alcohol. It burned his throat, and not in a fun way. Tasted awful, as fire from the alcohol itself was more than likely always overpowering any other flavor. Of course, there were exceptions. Far and few between, sure, but exceptions existed. It wasn't until the saboteur was incarcerated under false pretenses. It wasn't until he was turned into a fish monster. It wasn't until he was infected by an anomalous parasite that he finally looked at the bottle and thought, screw this. Granted, bottles were quite tiny now due to the size difference. Honestly, he wondered how much he could take until it actually worked on him. And why was the thought making him so giddy? Sebastian had spent the better half of a week collecting various spirits in the facility. And because of that, he had gotten the taste for it more and more. The need to be inebriated from the stress he was under 24/7. A moment just for himself. And he deadpanned as he thought about you, the pesky little insect living in his eyeball, slurping his blood straight from the source. Little creature. Maybe he could get rid of you by getting really hammered. Yeah, sure. That was his excuse now. Officially. Of course, alcohol was forbidden in the black site, but that didn't stop anyone from having it. From the executive scotch down to the middle management's flask of cheap whiskey, all kinds of throat-burning, probably flammable, and definitely mind-altering liquids could be found if looked for properly. Lockers, private quarters, breast pockets on bodies that haven't been eaten yet, and even a few toilets in the expendable wing were filled with toilet wine, though that he would keep for emergencies. Sebastian collected the various bottles in a sack that he carefully transported, keeping it out of harm's way. This was a precious resource. After all, food could be gotten fairly simply by taking down one of the more docile anomalies and cooking them long, thoroughly, and with enough salt to kill an ocean dweller. And, well, of course, there was a near endless amount of FUD. But who ate FUD unless absolutely at the brink of starvation? And what was FUD? The brown slime that was fed to the expendables served in glass jars. It was a mixture of sawdust, soy, and heavily processed food waste, like banana peels and apple cores. The tagline was, "It's like food, but worse! FUD!" Sebastian spread out his drinks on a large table inside one of the security office of the upper facility levels, considering there was less action from anomalies that would be dangerous to him. Will probably not end with his death if he was caught drunk here. If he even got that far. Call it an experiment. There were untitled flasks that were tickling his curiosity, spirits and liquids from the executive offices with titles and interesting age numbers, such as a wine from the early 1800s. Well, maybe not be brave for now, he thought as he stared at the flasks. So he grabbed a cheap scotch he had found hidden under a desk in one of the facility's office cubicles in the upper sections. Grinning to himself, he tapped his head as if to get your attention. "Hope you're ready for this little pest," he snarled. Meanwhile, you didn't have a name. You just went by X3232, codename Riversong. You were a tiny insect creature in the shape of an octopus paralarvae. You weren't a malicious parasite. All you really did was suck a minuscule amount of blood from Sebastian's eye artery, and occasionally swam past his vision. While awake, at least, you weren't all that intelligent, barely sentient. You are driven by your natural urges and instincts, but your key ability was the invasion of your host's dreams, creating vivid as well as pleasurable dreams, making you less of a parasite and more of a symbiote. For being fed and given shelter within your host, you made sure they got a good and regenerative sleep. Even though the administration of said dreams involved the use of a mild venom that you injected right into your host's brain. Though members of your kind were placed into expendables for testing, and so far, the venom had no lasting effects, as was flushed out of the body's system by the time host and Riversong entity awoke from their slumber. Urban Shade was even considering, upon finishing their study on X-3232, to purposefully infect high-ranking members of the organization just to guarantee a pleasurable and regenerative sleep for them. The only true downside was that even though infected awoke with a pleased and happy and relaxed feeling, they had absolutely zero memory of the dreams they had, which led often to confusion as well as annoyance due to the pleasantness of them. So as you were swimming around in Sebastian's right eyeball, you suddenly felt his body react. It heated up. He was coughing, and then the blood droplets you were ingesting, they were making you woozy. Your little body pulsed and wiggled, unsure if the disorientation was delightful or threatening, bordering on horrifying. You didn't know it yet, but this was what being drunk felt like. You didn't like it. Your little body had difficulty working through the new chemical reactions going inside your body. But alcohol wasn't dangerous to you. It just led to other consequences. Meanwhile, Sebastian stood there, looking at his hands. He was feeling his body react, but his brain didn't feel affected at all. Clear sign of not enough. But he had downed 2 bottles by now. He sighed. Oh well. He put the 3rd bottle to his lips. He had spent so much time gathering these. What a waste of time. So, might as well waste these too. It was the 4th and final bottle of scotch when he felt a pleasant warmth. He grinned as he pushed his back against the wall. His throat was in so much pain from the disgusting gasoline-tasting crap, but sweet, sweet, tender drunkenness. Sebastian managed to put the rest of the bottle and flask into his sack before sliding down the wall. He closed his eyes, grinning, wondering if the little creature in his brain was out of commission. Sebastian found himself in a strange void, floating freely, weightless. In front of his eyes, the entire color spectrum spread before him, twisting, turning. He was falling, flying, swimming, floating, running, being bitten, being chewed, being swallowed, and spit out again, all at the same time. His body erupting in a shower of tiny marbles, only to be put back together. Worst of all, it was the most orgasmic feeling he ever felt. There were shapes in the void. Simple ones, tubes with smiley faces, squares, mushroom-shaped creatures with hundreds of eyes that aimlessly floated. Salvia was pouring from Sebastian's mouth, colorful as the void itself, as he laughed thoughtlessly. His eyes just colorful static, bumping his head into one of the tubes. It felt squishy and soft and rubbery, like the skin of an especially adorable frog. And as he bounced off the creature, his body morphed into the shape of a steel ball, shiny, hard, and round. And like pinball, Sebastian was shot into various shapes and sounds of the dreamscape. Every bounce, every bump, filling his round metallic body with a feeling of absolute bliss, like a pleasant warmth going down from his throat into his stomach and then into his extremities. And your host burst through a large translucent triangle jelly, covering him in delectable raspberry slime. It stuck to his shiny roundness like a second layer, as well as sticky chunks that slowly peeled off of him as he flew through the colorful void. But the breakneck speed soon would be halted as he hit something soft and even more gelatinous and resistant than a triangle jelly. It was soft, with little bumps, smelling of lavender. It was warm, so wonderfully warm and soft. He unrolled himself, regaining his fractal humanoid shape. Opening his mouth, a large wave of red poured out like a third arm, and gently placed itself on the new shape, rubbing gentle circles as it took on the form of a female torso. Sebastian blinked, rubbing his face against the giant torso's skin. When it grew an arm, it caressed his back like he was a tiny toddler. He held onto it, as her fingers gently rubbed over his back, body slowly forming into a beautiful giant woman. Her hair flowed like a river in the endless void, like water. Her eyes were closed, smile on her lips, ears as sharp as knives. And try as he might, Sebastian was too small to wrap his entire body around her, as his fingers' tips just barely reached the rims of her hips. Every movement she made left behind colorful afterimages, as she booped his nose joyfully. Accepting everything that was happening to him, Sebastian allowed the force of the boob to push him away, floating endlessly and blissfully, weightlessly. There was a very faint resistance to it too, giving the void more the feeling of water, but it wasn't oppressive. It was not. But it wasn't oppressive, no. There was no pressure, just mindless bliss. The back of his head hit another tube, but unlike before, it reacted to his touch. Smiling, it quickly wrapped around him, squeezing him until he popped like a balloon. His thousands of tiny exploded particles swept up by the void's current, fusing and popping, squeezing and squishing, until his form was restored, and Sebastian opened his eyes, and there she was again, the angelic figure of the woman, as perfect as she was before, but he was bigger now, as big as her, no longer fun-sized. He embraced her unclothed form, and your host looked at you with admiration, with beauty, with love. Your hand placed on his chest, your skin fractally melting into one another, faces coming closer, lips touching, melting together in a flood of unsung emotions, passion and lust, bodies fusing together into a marriage of flesh, love, and life itself. A joyful moment of absorption and regurgitation, melting and hardening, warmth and cold, until the formless mass of sheer pleasure shattered into the void's surface, spreading out like a carpet of grass, flowering and blooming into a beautiful field. A hand of grass caressing a face made from flowers, a river's tongue pushing into a dripping cave, tasting the endlessness of nothingness. The sweet taste of the nectar of creation itself. A fine breeze brushing over the blades of grass like the gentle touch of a lover over skin. A tree mightily growing into the formless sky, shaking and brushing for the wind, its fruits falling to the ground, nourishing the surrounding grassland. Two arms like roots, emerging from the ground, wrapping around one another. You and your host blinked simultaneously, and the ground gave away. A star-filled blackness with trillions of tiny lights, larger than life nebulas and twinkling time dilations, decorated the world around the both of you. And your godlike bodies colliding with the force of 1,000 galaxies, crashing into each other, merging into a black hole of omnipotent pleasure. It was a slow process, waking up from a dream such as this. Sebastian had no real concept of what had happened. But he remembered every second of it, yes, but it was too abstract for his normal mind to fully comprehend. But he remembered it. A dream caused by the parasite, 3232. What a trip it was. He felt 1,000 years older, 1,000 years wiser, and yet 1,000 years younger, all at the same time. It took the saboteur a while to realize that he'd been drooling all night. That he was lying in a puddle of his own spittle. Too pleased he was by the visions you had given him. And he was grateful. A feeling which surprised him. This one remained in his brain. That was for sure. It was like every drug he had ever taken, he took once again for the first time and all together. Sebastian looked up, as if he was lying in your lap. Oh no, he purred. Guess I won't be trying to get rid of you no more. That was probably the best thing I've ever felt. Can't wait for next time.
Hey, you watched the video until the very end. That's very kind of you. But before I say goodbye, I have to shout out all of my lovely channel members, especially my high-ranking darling stewards, who get a members-only video every month. Join the tier for just $4.99. Anyways, we have Nicolai Hatcher, Maxi Cat, Alison Watkins, Bella Mare, Mystic Jade 111, Giovanna Moretti, Twilight Mia, Angry Boxman, Hella, Anonymous Weep, and Nicodemus D. Thank you for supporting me. Also, thank you to everybody else who is supporting me. You are keeping me alive. Proof you watched the video so far. Just leave a comment with the words banana bread down below.